So we always begin thinking about a power pack and this sequence of instruction with what to teach. So for example, we might identify and then define as a group that we are teaching labeling, basically building children's vocabulary, and we might be thinking about labeling body parts, emotions, letter tags, number tags, actions, physical states, emotions, all kinds of things, right? So we know that we have to spend some time thinking about what to teach. And we know that we have to think about different times of the day, and we need to think about so the when we teach, what time of the day is it? Is it a routine activity? Is it a planned activity? Is it a child-directed activity? Really thinking about the best match for the outcome. So something like labeling, of course, can easily be taught in these routine activities, planned activities, and child-initiated activities, and in fact should be taught across all of them. However, we need to be intentional and make sure that there are specifically planned times during each of these daily activities in which we will actually teach words and word meaning. Then we need to think about if we're going to use something like a story to help us facilitate a more specific, focused look at vocabulary. So it's not just any word that we might come up with, but maybe keywords from a story. We want to think about the location. So if we're going to do it across the day, we can do it in the most obvious, which might be circle time or in the book area, but we might also want to think about, are there quiet times of the day and therefore quiet locations where kids could be engaged with the materials, which is what the focus of this recording is, the what to teach. But we need to make sure we've thought about if this is the time of day is going to be story reading, are there multiple locations when we can deliver this very intentional instruction or this power pack that is working on teaching labels. So we really need to think about the materials that we have. So if we've gone through thinking about that we want to teach labeling, we've thought about our daily routine and the different times in which we want to teach, we've thought about the different locations, so there's multiple and varied opportunities for children. Now we really need to think about how do our materials support teaching a particular outcome. So for now, we're going to shift gears a little bit away from something like labeling or story time or the quiet area, and we're just going to think about materials generically. What do they mean? And so there's lots of categories of materials. We can think of different kinds of books. There could be the texture of the book, the degree of difficulty within the book, the size of the book, the function of the book, if the book is in paper or in digital format. We can also think of different types of manipulatives, so different things that kids do around from Play-Doh to puzzles. We can also think of dolls or things that have some sort of dramatic play to them, some sort of imaginary play to them, something where things take on a symbol. We can also think of categories like musical instruments, and then you can list all the different types of musical instruments that children may want to play with. Another main category of what we might teach with was what many call loose parts. And these are just the remnants, the things that are around in your drawer, in your car, in the trunk of your car, in the bottom of your sofa cushions. These are just things that are around that can really promote learning. So we can think about these kind of broad categories and then dig deep within a category. So we don't have to have books and manipulatives and dolls and musical instruments and loose parts. We might just pick something like loose parts and then go deep there. So we can get pine cones, and we can get grass, we can get seeds, but we can also think about art supplies, and we can think about recyclable materials, and all of this is under loose parts. A really interesting thing to think about is measurement materials. This is another broad category that we may not have thought about before, but the idea is we're looking at materials and trying to figure out what makes them common, what makes them kind of go together. So for example, we might think of containers and lids. Okay, what are all the different kinds of things that are containers and lids? So we can have bottles and tins and baskets and jars and plant pots and jugs and trunks. We can also have things that scoop. So what are all the different things that scoop? And this is where time that people might spend on Pinterest really works out for them, because you can search through Pinterest different scoopers, and you'll come up with things that you may not have thought of before that aren't the things that you just off the top of your head think of. So if you don't eat ice cream, let's say, you might not think of those as a form or a category or a type of scoops, materials that scoop. So then we can also think of calibrated objects. So here's one that you may not have thought of, a butter stick. So on many wrappers around butter sticks, there are the markers for how much of the butter, if you need a certain amount in a recipe. And so that is a calibration of amount. And so we can really think about different ways to conceptualize calibrated objects that kids may come across with. Another big category might be just to sort things by shape and sizes. So we want to think about, okay, if we're going to have different kinds of boxes, do we have different sizes of boxes and different shapes that they take on? If we're going to have different kinds of cubes, do we have different ones that again have different sizes and shapes? If we just want a variety of materials, like they don't have any rhyme or reason, or they're back to those loose parts, again, can we sort them, think about them by size and shape? And then if we want to make sure that there are things just in the daily environment that lend themselves for us to teach with, we might just think of what are the common materials that we can then do things like compare and contrast with. And then one last example of thinking about the what we teach with is, are we thinking about sort of the either, the or, the this way or that way. So the standard versus the non-standard, the living versus the non-living. So sometimes these parallels, these opposites, lend themselves to really going deep with a type of set of materials. So we might classify or make a list of things that are standard tools for measuring, and this may be dependent upon culture or familiarity for the children. What is really a standard tool versus something that is non-standard. In different cultures, what one culture thinks is non-standard might be the actual standard. So it's sort of unique to your group how you would then classify what to teach with. So we've got some examples here of a list of standard tools for measuring and non-standard. But what you should get from all of this is that we've really thought about the materials and how do the materials then support whatever it is that we are teaching, whether that be vocabulary, if we're teaching attributes, if we're teaching problem solving, if we're teaching symbolizing. We really need to think through after we've defined the what to teach. Let's say in this instance we're teaching something about measurement, and we've thought about the time of day, and there are likely many times of the day, and we've thought about logical and maybe even illogical locations that would lend themselves. We really need to think about our materials, and we have to think about them deeply. So sometimes thinking about their broader classification, or again going to something like Pinterest and trying to figure out all the different varieties may help us get some real depth to the what we teach with.